Let's go back to a time when Rockstar wasn't the king of re-releasing the same game over and over again for the next 15 years. Back when GTA Online and its 500,000 DLC updates were just a wrinkle in Dan Houser's bald head. Let's go back to 2003. I know, at this point it was quite a long time ago. Hell, it was 20 years ago and I wasn't even alive yet. Back when Rockstar was actually releasing things that weren't Grand Theft Auto related in nature. While it was still their main IP, they did have other IPs under their belt. Most important to this video being the likes of Max Payne, which was a series birthed from the creative minds over at Remedy Entertainment, a small Finnish game development studio who had been picked up by Rockstar years back at this point. At this point in time, they had already had one Max Payne game under their belt, which was released in 2001. I have a video on that game, and I'd encourage you to go and watch it before you return here. Don't worry, I'll still be right here when you return. You still here? Well, to get everyone who refused to go back up to speed, Max is a hard-boiled New York cop whose family gets wrecked by a bunch of drug addicts, high on a hip new designer drug called Valkyr. One thing leads to another, and he ends up waging a one-man war against the Italian mob in New York, eventually getting tangled up in a conspiracy involving a secret society of sweaty old men called the Inner Circle. In the end, Max ends up wasting an entire legion of mobsters as well as putting a large pharmaceutical company out of business. All in the name of swift justice. You know what, that one sounded better in my head. Can we just cut that? Okay, you've been caught mostly up to speed. I'm just gonna jump right into the main game here. Also, this is my first full playthrough of this game, which means I can only play on Fugitive. Didn't stop me from dying an amusing number of times. So we start off at the Manor, now apparently. Max gives a short opening monologue before we get reintroduced to our leading man, as well as Mona Sachs, the ill-fated femme fatale from the previous game. She'll be very, very important going forwards. After that little shot from the present, we go back to the past. Not far into the past, to when Max is in shit shape in a hospital. Apparently some shit went down causing him to be shot twice or something. I don't know, we'll get to that later. We'll be in the dark for most of this game, really. After we pull ourselves together, we can finally start to move around and get our bearings. The hospital seems pretty vacant apart from us and this guy who's been shot. Max instinctively takes his gun, which we'll be needing to use very soon anyways, as a balaclava-clad goon steps in and we have to waste it. After that, we take the elevator down and meet with a geriatric fellow. Wait, that's Chief Jim Brever from the last game? Jesus, man, when'd you get so old? You didn't look a day over 40 in the last game. Now you look like you've aged about, 30 years since then. I know 2 years is kind of a long time, but Jesus, man. Oh, he's already dead. A goon with an Ingram shows up and melts his old ass, and we duck back into the elevator, only for the goon to blow up some gas tanks nearby, causing the elevator to malfunction, meaning we lose our guns. After we get out of the elevator, we stumble through some more hospital rooms before coming to a small morgue where we find the body of Detective Winterson, one of Max's colleagues, who we apparently shot. I don't remember doing that, but we'll get to know her more later. After that, we flash forward to the Manor again, where Max waxes some more vague poetic metaphors about life and shit like that. I'm not really paying attention to the story if you couldn't tell. I should probably talk about the writing in this game, which is definitely better than it was in the previous game. Not to say the writing was bad in the previous game. It's still a cut above basically everything else that was coming out at the time. But the plot is so simple that it can be summarized in like a paragraph. Hell, I did that like less than 2 minutes ago. Here, the writing is significantly more complex and layered. I believe I read somewhere that the script was almost 3 times as long as the one from the previous game, and that checks out. Not to mention the fact that this game definitely strives for a darker mood. Max is sort of portrayed as a sort of gray area figure, writing in the lines of morality. He's not the fucking Punisher or anything, but he's certainly no Boy Scout. But still, he is the main character of the game, so he has to be the good guy. For Christ's sake, he's on the box of the game. Whatever, I'm gonna get to the game now. After our jump back to the present, we jump back to the past, again, where we find that Alfred Woden, esteemed member of the Inner Circle, said secret society of old men from the previous game, upheld his end of the deal and let Max get off scot-free with the murder of, like, 500 people, probably? Max is a little salty about this, because in the end, Alfred was still the one that ended up getting his family killed. Still, though, Max gets to walk away from the event a hero. Max doesn't even thank him, and shortly after that he leaves the DEA for good. I mean, I can't really blame him. Having your best friend murdered and having to deal with the blood of, like, what did I say it was, like 500 guys is probably not a fun time. He ends up going back to work for the NYPD, where he gets a call about shots being fired at a warehouse, and Max decides to go in for it. Max also knows that the warehouse is owned by one Vladimir Lem, our old Russian mob friend from the previous game who bailed their ass out a couple of times. We arrive at the scene and hear some screaming and gunfire. Honestly, I would have figured that'd be normal anywhere else in New York, but apparently not. So Max calls for backup, grabs his gun, and goes in. This is where we finally get control of Max, and I have to say it does feel way better to move in this game. It feels generally less clunky and jank than it did, even if this game is still using the first game's engine. After we get our way inside, we come across a cleaning crew guy who seems innocent enough, until he isn't. This guy is one of the cleaners who are effectively the main enemy faction for the entire game. They remain an enigma throughout, as their true employer isn't really revealed until the third act of the game. Anyways, I suppose I should get to the actual gameplay now, and to say the least, it's a very impressive improvement. Shooting now feels way more satisfying as the enemies now ragdoll in comedic ways due to the new Havoc physics engine, which also applies to most other objects in the game as well, whether it be boxes or, boxes. Yeah, there's just a lot of boxes in this game, actually. The health system remains pretty much identical to how it was in the previous game. The only real change being Max's silhouette, which is significantly more detailed than it was in the previous game. However, the biggest change to the gameplay is with the bullet time. Activating it on its own is now way more lucrative than using a shoot dodge. For one, you move faster when using it, meaning using weapons like shotguns is a breeze, so you can close the gap almost immediately. Secondly, and most importantly, the game slows down even more with each kill you get, making it easier to dodge bullets with more kills. This makes bullet time insanely useful. You might think going in that it's a bit overkill and the bullet time is OP, but you're still a glass cannon. Max can go down quite easily, even on this skill, which is the easiest one. The more useful bullet time also means that the iconic shoot dodge gets sorta shafted, since using bullet time without shoot dodging is way more useful. Back to the level itself, though. When we get upstairs, we find this illegal firearms manufacturing joint, which has unfortunately been cleared out, presumably to get rid of any evidence. We can still find some painkillers and some shotgun shells, though. We can also find a phone where Vlad has left a message for Annie Finn, who apparently runs this joint. We can actually find Annie, as she is currently on the premises. We can't speak to her, though, since she's being held hostage by some cleaner goons. Max's dumbass tries to intervene, but fails miserably.
What do you want? We can...
NYPD, drop him! Finish her!
Oh, God, no!
I don't know why he didn't just try to use bullet time and pop in there and kill them, but you know what, it's whatever. Annie ends up getting capped, and Max laments the fact that he couldn't do anything to save her. Let's just hope it won't be a pain in the ass later on down the line. Oh, it's good to have you back. Hey, when did you start spelling your name with a Y? That's new. On the topic of the weapons, we can get our hands on several in this first level. You've already seen the 9mm pistols, which you can now pistol whip people with. Other than the pistols, we can get our hands on an Ingram, which we can still do wield and is still absolutely fantastic. Also a sawed-off and pump-action shotgun, which are better than they were in the previous game due to the bullet time buff. More important than all of this, though, we can find our first encounter with the one and only Mona Sachs, who is incredibly important to this game's story. For right now, though, she just caps a couple of dudes and hops into an elevator before we can talk with her. After our encounter with her, we just have to shoot our way through the place in an attempt to catch up with the cleaners before they pull out. We're just barely too late to catch them. Max tries to stop them, but they end up getting away anyway, not before nearly running over Max. The nice lady who prevented us from being turned into a pancake is Detective Witterson, who was formally introduced here. She's one of Max's colleagues. Once again, a character that will be very important later on. God, I sound like such a broken record right now. After they got away, we cut to the police station where Chief Rivera is. Payne and Witterson are having a discussion about the events at the warehouse. They talk about the details of the case, about Annie Finn and the three groups of interest. One of those groups being Vlad with his Russian mob goons, the second being the Italian mob, the third most puzzling of all being the cleaning clowns who have seemingly no ties to anyone else. The cleaners also mention some guy named Kaufman who could be a person of interest. The chief hands off the case to Payne, as he can't make a lick of sense out of it. Instead of buzzing off, Max sticks around to hear about Winterson's case, which is the murder of Senator Sebastian Gates. There's also apparently an eyewitness to this one too. Unfortunately for Max, the eyewitness is Mona Sachs. And Max withholds the fact that he had seen her at the warehouse. Damn, this is going to prove to be an odd love triangle. After some online snooping, Max isn't getting any new leads, so he decides to hit up Vlad for a meeting at his new restaurant. If this building looks familiar, that's because it should be. It's the old Ragnarok nightclub that we shot our way through in the first game. Vlad bought the place, where he plans on going legit by starting some trendy-ass restaurant called Vodka. When we arrive, Vlad is pinned down inside, and we have to go in through the side door to save his ass. Once we find a way inside, we have to get our asses to Vlad. We stumble through some back rooms, most notably finding Vlad's office in the back, where he sent a message, presumably to his girlfriend. Gee, I wonder who that could be. He also name drops me, which is a bit of a bizarre choice considering the fact that we barely know the person he's talking to. At least not yet, we don't. Anyways, after that we run into a couple of Italian mob goons, and then we bump into Mike the cowboy, who is not a cowboy, but he is one of Vlad's friends. He offers to help us carve a path through the goons, and I decide to take him up on that offer. He helps a little, probably because he has a nice AK on him too. We'll be getting our hands on one of those later. You could kill him for his, but I keep him around since 3 guns is better than 2. On the topic of the actual level design itself, it's remarkably better than it was in the previous game. The areas generally look more realistic and feel more lived in, due in no part due to the jump forward in technology. Just compare an area in this game to one in the previous game and it'll show you just how fast video game graphics were advancing back then. It's actually kind of crazy. I should also mention the comic panels here, which make a comeback, as they should. With the bigger budget, Remedy went all out, making these look as cinematic as fucking possible, and it's awesome. Sure, they may have had the budget to move for more in-engine cutscenes, but these comic panels are part of the game's style. At least until 3, but then again that's a topic for another video. Anyways, back to the game. After clearing out a bunch of mob goons in areas new and relatively familiar, we can find the area that Vlad is holed up in. He's being pinned down by, of all people, Vinny Gognitti, another returning character from the previous game. He survived being shot in the chest like 50 times with the Desert Eagle, but you know what, it doesn't matter. Being shot in a Max Payne game is like falling into a pit in Star Wars. You just don't die. After we're done clearing the place out, he dips, leaving us to talk with Vlad. Vlad and I shoot the shit for a bit, and Vlad laments the loss of Annie from the previous chapter. Apparently he fucked up his arm on a date yesterday, which is a bit odd. Maybe he's into the painful stuff, eh? You know what, that one was garbage. Can I just cut that? Whatever. After that, we leave and head back to our apartment where Max passes out on the couch, slipping into the game's first nightmare sequence. It really isn't too consequential. Max just stumbles around his apartment building, which has a hospital morgue in the basement. Inside one of the little compartments is Mona's body for some reason. Maybe a sign of things to come? Oh wait, no, she's right there. You know, I don't know what's real anymore. We get jumped by the cops after that, so obviously we run away, then we're teleported to a police interrogation room where Max is being interrogated by Winterson and Bravura. Max is done putting up with it though. He's a strong, independent lead character, so he grabs a gun off of a desk that's just there for some reason and just fucking kills them, ending the dream sequence. After he wakes back up on the couch in his apartment, Mona is at the door. That's right, she's still real, and Max obviously lets her in. She explains that there's a contract out on both of them. Before this conversation can really go anywhere though, we get ambushed by a sniper and Mona runs off, and Max decides to give chase. Not before I call up Winterson and tell her to get some backup over to my place. This level as a whole is actually pretty damn fun. There's a nice old lady who gives us a shotgun for free. It's not even close to being the best weapon, and I already had one, but still, it's a nice gesture. And after that, we jump out into the side of this building, and we do a little platforming. The platforming in this game is still as boring as it was in the previous game, and you know what, I'm just gonna pay no further attention to it and move on. In terms of enemies, we're still fighting the cleaning goons. They're basically a non-issue, and we can just abuse bullet time when you get into a sticky spot. We can also bump into another nice old lady who offers to give us some painkillers, which is good because I was in short supply for most of this game going forwards, actually. After carving a path through some more cleaning goons, we can find the door that actually leads to the nice apartments. Knowing New York, they're probably only a marginal improvement over the standard, but you know, it's whatever. It's probably not worth the 500% increase in rent, but you know what, I'm just gonna take what I can get. To actually get the code, we need to find the janitor. He's just chilling in the basement with his headphones on, which would explain why he didn't hear any of the gunfire upstairs and fucking shit himself. Since we're a cop, he willingly gives us the code, which is 667, a nod to the previous game. After we go back upstairs, we clear out some more luxury apartments before we do some platforming to reach the sniper's vantage point. Apparently he's been here for a while, stalking us without us even noticing. Most importantly though, we can also take his sniper rifle, which is fine. I barely make use out of the thing since it only appears like 3 or 4 times throughout the game. After we get through the sniper's joint, we end up having to loop back around through the building, as someone set a bomb up in Max's apartment, which is something I did not know about until writing the script actually. At this point, we're just kinda loosely following Mona's path through the place when we bump into a friendly homeless guy. Apparently at one point he was a cop too, which would explain his fondness for dual Berettas. I don't know why every single cop in New York can dual-wield guns so effectively, but you know what, it's fine. He's nice enough to also lend a helping hand in combat too. There's also this lady near the door who says that we can get out through a window on the 3rd floor if you put out the fire. She also pulls a gun out of somewhere and agrees to help us in our fight, meaning we finally assembled the task force that New York truly deserves. A prostitute, a homeless guy, and a painkiller-addicted cop. After we kill the flames, we can get out through the window and make it down to the corridor where we just get jumped by some more cleaners. Okay, maybe bullet time's a little OP. After that little adventure, we went back to the police station to talk with the chief. Both Max and the chief are stumped on the case, with Max bringing up the fact that Vinny has been calling out hits on people. He may have been using the cleaners as a third party to get the dirty work done. After that, though, Max decides to head up Mona to see if they can meet up at her place. Her place being an old abandoned funhouse, which has to be one of the coolest video game safe houses I've ever seen. Regardless, once we arrive, we actually have to get through the joint. The funhouse level doesn't actually have any enemies in it, it's just sort of a walking section where you go through the funhouse as it is in its back rooms. Even if there aren't any enemies in this chapter, I still wasted a bunch of shotgun ammo just shooting at the cardboard cutouts as they pass by for amusement. There are some more notable bits here and there, like the latter half of the funhouse, which is set in this mental hospital bit, where we can find thinly veiled Shining references and get nearly killed with this comically large needle. After we get through the bulk of the funhouse, we can find this room where you can just fuck around with a bunch of the physics objects because, well, you've got a physics engine, right? Might as well flex its capabilities. Half-Life 2 wouldn't revolutionize physics in gaming until a year later, so having any form of physics-based, well, anything was still pretty cool. I should also touch on the title of this chapter being A Linear Sequence of Scares, which has to be one of the best title cards in a video game ever. It's a perfect way to describe linear games and such, you know? It's pretty cool. After we get outside, we climb through a window and make our way into Mona's safe house where we can pick up a new gun, that being the MP5 submachine gun. It's pretty solid, it's rather accurate and has a scope for long ranges. We don't get a ton of ammo for it for a while, but when we do, it does become a workhorse and part of our main arsenal. Also, you can dual-wield Desert Eagles now, which is nice. We find Mona in the shower in a scene that is not so PG clean, but it's not important. What is important is the story-related bomb that Mona drops when we finally get to talking. She says that the Inner Circle, you remember them, right, have been trying to kill everyone that knows of their existence. Luckily for us, Mona has a contact in the Inner Circle who could possibly shed some light on the situation. So we pull up to the contact's place of residence and we're already too late. The cleaners are already there and have basically taken out everyone on the inside. If we're fast enough, there's still a chance that we could get him out in one piece. Not helping this mission is the fact that the elevators work off the apartment keys from the front desk. The cleaners have jammed the elevators to the floors they're on, which is equally unhelpful. Max decides that he'll go up alone and leaves Mona on surveillance duty in the lobby. At the very least, they have headsets to keep in contact. In terms of gameplay, this level is awesome. The clean, almost clinical-looking apartments are a nice contrast to the crummier apartments we just shot our way through a level or two ago. The place is also just crawling with cleaners, at least a couple dozen of them for sure. They're dug in like an Alabama tick, and we've got to kill all of them. Mona also does a great job with the callouts, actually relaying where the enemies are as well as drip-feeding us information on where to go next. When we actually get to the guy's room, he's already dead. I know, who would have seen that one coming, right? If he wasn't, the game would probably be half as long, which means it wouldn't even be considered as a feature-length film. If there's one thing I would like to give this game shit for, it's definitely its runtime. My entire playthrough was only the better part of about 4 hours. Anyways, what was I talking about? Oh yeah. Cleaners, dead contact, Kaufman. Wait, I didn't actually mention Kaufman yet. He shows up here all proud and shit like he's the head honcho over the squeaky cleaning company. He's a fucking pushover. Hell, he's the first guy to die in his boss fight, if you can even call it that. How dangerous can he be? He only has one line of dialogue in the entire game.
Find him. Take care of him.
After we clear a path through the rest of the apartments, we get back down to the lobby and find that the place has been swarmed by cops, which is not good for us considering the fact that we're pretty clearly in cahoots with a convicted felon. Mona is swiftly locked up and we're taken back to the police station. Brewer chews us out and sets us up with a desk job after taking my guns. All 15 of them. Even my ability to hit things. Theoretically, Max could definitely fuck someone up with his fists, but I'll play pacifist for right now. Anyways, now we get to walking around the police station and fucking around for a while. The chief wanted us to write a report on the whole case, and Max actually sits down to do it. Someone immediately starts calling Winterson's phone. Max decides to pick it up out of kindness, and the caller hangs up the literal instant that Max picks up the phone. I'm not sure how they knew it wasn't Winterson, but hey, they did. Winterson is in the interrogation lineup room talking with a witness. One of the women in the lineup room is Mona, who sticks out like a sore thumb, making me very distracted in this entire scene for some reason. The witness is rightfully concerned about the goons in the jumpsuits that fucking killed everyone, but Winterson just shrugs it off and tells him to pick the lady who looks familiar. Obviously, he chooses Mona, and everyone is sent back to their holding cells. Our next order of business after having a chat with Winterson is to have a brief chat with the dude in the lineup room. He rightfully thinks it's odd that we weren't allowed to talk with Winterson about the jumpsuit cleaners, which is mildly suspicious. Whatever, after we talk with the dude, we go into the holding cells and talk with Mona. She asks Max to let her out. She thinks that the cleaners are going to hit the place, and Max just kind of shrugs it off. Then Mona tells us to talk with Alfred Roden so we can get some kind of answers for this whole thing. After we leave him a message, surprise, surprise, the place gets raided by the cleaners and we have to get our asses out and find Mona. She was smart enough to hide under the bed until the goons came, and then she just kind of escapes afterwards. In terms of weapons, we're back down to our bare essentials after the chief took our shit. At the very least, we'll have most of our core arsenal back by the end of the level. I should also highlight the music here, which is superb. If there's one thing that these games improve on with each installment, it's the score. This one was done by the same dudes as the previous games, whose names I'm still not comfortable with saying out loud, but that's besides the point. It has slightly darker tones than the previous game, with more orchestral sounds compared to the somewhat crass guitars and drums of the previous entry. Still though, good shit, why don't you take a listen? I think it definitely fits the noir and detective atmosphere way better than it was in the previous game, even though the previous game does have a very nice soundtrack. After we clear a path through the underbelly of the NYPD, we get to the street where Mona is nowhere to be found. Coincidentally though, Vlad is there to pick us up. We kindly ask him to give us a lift over to Coney Island, and he obliges. They shoot the shit for a while, and then Vlad brings up the point that the Inner Circle are just a bunch of phonies, and that of all people, Vinny Gagnini may have got to deal with them. I'm not sure how Vinny got a hold of them, but it's besides the point. Max asks Vlad about Mona, and he says some not-so-good shit that pisses off Max to the point of actually hating Vlad. Whatever, he was kind of a smarmy prick, so I don't really mind. He does still drop some hard bars about fate and life and shit like that, which is still pretty cool, though.
Hypothetically, if the only choice you've got is to do the wrong thing, then it's not really the wrong thing. It's more like fate. You have to do what you have to do.
It's never that easy.
Of course. We agree to disagree.
After he drops us off, Mona is there to greet us, and Max and her decide to get a little steamy, so I'm just going to blur this and give you a list of everything that Max wants in life. A cigarette, a glass of whiskey. He wants the sun to shine. He wants to sleep so he can forget. He wants his family to be back from the dead. He wants to change the past. Unlimited ammo and a license to kill. What is he, fucking Duke Nukem or something? Before we can get down and funky with Mona, the cleaners rudely ambush us and we have to dig in and clear them out. Before we can get to Mona's safe house, a catwalk beneath us breaks and we fall back down to the ground floor, somehow not brutally destroying our spine in the process. I guess that's the benefit of being addicted to painkillers. This is where the level starts properly, and I have to say, this one might be one of the best chapters in the game. On the surface, it might seem like a lazy rehash of an old location, but I feel like our first visit was just giving us a taste of what this chapter actually is. The second visit recontextualizes the lighthouse of the funhouse with proper combat, and I have to say they did a bang-up job with this one. This is also the level where I finally started dying a lot, because I'm being put up against hordes of goons with barely any ammo to spare and no painkillers, so that's fun. At the very least, Mona is nice enough to take out some goons from a vantage point at the top of the funhouse, which is definitely nice. When we make it out of the funhouse, the cleaners are just about to get away again. One of the vans is its back door is open, and Max takes it as an opportunity to hop in and hitch a ride to the cleaners' base of operations. I suppose Vlad was right. Fate really is a thing after all. The next few chapters are split up between the dilapidated construction yard and its surrounding buildings. The first few parts of this section are actually very good. Go through and kill the bad men in this crumbling skyscraper. Sounds pretty self-explanatory, right? Mona shows up sometime when we're going through the first building. Unfortunately, she's ended up on the wrong side of the lot, though. We'll have to fight our way to the middle to meet up. The mercs have set up a pretty permanent base here, and it shows. There are plenty of explosive and weapon crates littered around these old offices. There's even a sort of armory area where they've been stockpiling weaponry, which is good for us since I get plenty of MP5 ammo out of it. This is where I start making really extensive use out of the MP5 too. It does great damage and has a scope. It's pretty much the best weapon we can get our hands on until I get a steady supply of M4 carbine ammo. The mercs have also begun to shed their cleaner attire, instead donning traditional Kevlar vests and black clothing. Their health pool hasn't increased though, which is nice. Eventually, after cleaning some house, we come across this fucking morgue that's just been set up by the cleaners, where they've been dumping the bodies of just like the dozens, possibly even hundreds of people they've been killing. It'd take weeks to go through all these murders one by one. Max tells Mona to phone the cops, but she rightfully doesn't do. After all, she's a fugitive from the law. Calling the cops to take care of something doesn't exactly seem like a fantastic idea. After our chat with Mona, a bunch of cleaners bust in and try to kill us. Fortunately, or unfortunately depending on how you see it, the room is rigged with explosives. They run away from the blast and we try to give chase only to be knocked off of our ass by an explosion. This also sets the building on fire, which is rather unfortunate considering the fact that it's a pretty long way down. I'm not sure why this one pallet of explosives caused the building to get set ablaze when we've blown up at least a dozen other cases, and those did basically fuck all for the structural integrity of this building. Whatever, we just have to make our way through this building and jump onto some shoddy-looking scaffolding where Max falls and gets crushed by a piece of debris, rendering him out of commission for a while. I'm not sure how his spine isn't broken again, but still must have been a pain in the ass for him. I am really forcing these at this point. After this, we shift over to Mona's point of view when she just arrived at the site, meaning that Max is still in that condemned building from the very beginning. She's got her trusty Desert Eagle and her Dragunov sniper rifle, which is unique to this section of the game when we play as Mona, which is actually pretty cool. As stated previously, she starts on the other end of the complex, so we'll have to fight through another small army of goons before we can reach Max. This section is actually pretty fun, just some good old-fashioned wise guy whacking. Also, Mona just has the ability to go into bullet time for some reason. I thought it was exclusively Max's thing, but okay. Everything goes pretty smoothly until we get to the sniping section. This section isn't terrible, it's just kind of mediocre, especially compared to everything before this. We have to provide Max with covering fire as he navigates the yard, taking out hostiles in his way. At the very least, he's not completely defenseless. He has an M4 carbine and infinite ammo. I'm not sure when he got all that ammo, considering the fact that I had like 10 bullets left when I started this level, but you know, just one of those game design quirks, huh? He's rather good at taking out enemies that I don't take out, so it's actually pretty decent. I mean, he's good at taking them out until he isn't. A merc sniper forces Max to run for cover as he's pinned down by the suppressive fire. Unfortunately for him, Mona can't get a shot off at the sniper, so he needs to retreat back into the building and head back through another area where he can get a clean shot. This process repeats a couple of times, as Max needs to find an exit to the yard or else he'll end up overcome with cleaner goons. And between each section, the game adds in new indoor areas to break up the somewhat monotonous sniping. Mona's Dragunov doesn't have the cool bullet can that Max's sniper does, so it's just kind of anticlimactic seeing a random goon crumple to the floor. At least the ragdoll physics are still pretty funny. The best part of this section, though, is the music. The track used here is called Duty vs. Passion, and it's just fucking fantastic. Not only in a narrative sense, but in the sense that it's just a great fucking tune. Take a listen. God, that's just good shit. I must reiterate, this soundtrack kicks all kinds of ass. This ain't even the best one in the series, though. Oh, you'll see. Finally, after shooting our way through a gauntlet of mercs and goons, we finally meet back up with Mona. And Winterson, who just arrived at the scene very recently. This presents us with quite the dilemma. Max tries to persuade Winterson to not shoot Mona, which obviously doesn't work. Mona pulls her gun, but before she can kill Winterson... Max does it instead. Wait, so can Max use bullet time out of his own volition? Why didn't he think of that before? Max tells Mona to run off and we just kind of sit around at the scene of the crime. As we turn to walk away, Winterson shoots us in the back and we stumble into a hole. After we fall into the hole, we're thrust into the second to last dream sequence in the game, where we stumble around the hospital or apartment building or something. I don't know. There's hospital beds here too, so, we can also find this little prison area which we've been imprisoned in. No, Max, not me. Listen, alright, I'm not the guy for analyzing this game's themes or anything like that. For Christ's sake, I play Doom mods on this channel primarily, which are like the lowest possible bar for storytelling usually. If you can understand the story, then that's great. Please leave a comment if you can understand the story. Please like and subscribe if you can understand the story. Thank you. It turns out we were in a fucked up version of the police station since we come up into the office area, and after that Winterson and Mona shoot us, effectively ending the dream sequence. After that we flash forwards to the Manor, again, as Max waxes some more poetry about life and shit like that, before we end up back in the hospital area at the beginning of the game. Apparently this wasn't some kind of hallucination, which means that Chief Bravura is actually dead. Kind of unceremoniously killed by a random goon. Oh well. However, Max finally decides to come back to his senses and check Winterson's body, where he finds a napkin, or some piece of memorabilia from Vodka, Vlad's restaurant. This sets up the implications that Winterson was actually in cahoots with Vlad the entire time. This isn't just some random twist either. This is foreshadowed all the way back to the beginning of the game actually, where you can stumble into Vlad's office in his restaurant to find a message he left for his girlfriend being Winterson. It would also explain why Winterson was so stingy with her calls recently, as she'd been trying to hide the fact that she had been in contact with a hardened criminal from everyone. I suppose that made two of us though. Before we can get a chance to really think about it, we're jumped by a goon at the door of the morgue. Max, who still has no gun, is forced to ram into the door, kicking the merc onto his ass, which gives us a chance to run off. We run around for a bit, leading him around the hospital until we stumble into this empty office space, where we need to hide for just long enough so that a security guard will stumble in there, get killed, allowing us to grab his gun and kill our pursuers. That sounds like a lot, but at the very least the game is nice enough to throw us a cornucopia of healing items. After that, the level is pretty straightforward, if maybe slightly harder due to the lack of ammo, which will be a recurring issue from now on moving forwards. There's also the staircase of death that is just crammed full of mercs. It killed me more times than I'd like to admit. Regardless, after we leave the hospital, we finally head over to Alfred's Manor, a meeting that should have happened hours ago at this point. The old man is now saddled to a wheelchair due to cancer. He says that the Inner Circle have been going through a period of civil war due to renegade faction in their ranks. The old bastards have been reduced to fighting petty mob wars at this point. I don't really give a shit about that, but it does turn out that Vlad was the one leading the cleaning commandos. It also turns out that Vlad was a member of the Inner Circle and he's been trying to take control over the organization for years at this point. After he kills Vinny Gagniti, he plans on taking out Alfred, who at one point mentored the Russian. After that string of revelations, Max sets out to kill Vlad, and he starts by going to his restaurant in an attempt to find the Russian. Vlad isn't there, which was to be expected, but Mike the Cowboy is. He taunts us over the radio, and we have to go in to find the bastard. On the way through, we just take out dozens of mobsters. The restaurant has got a new coat of paint too since we last gone through. It almost looks ready to be unveiled to the public. Too bad that's not gonna happen. Speaking of Mike, he's not a boss or anything. He goes down pretty easily, all things considered, which is a refreshing change compared to the bosses of the previous game. I also find a board in Vlad's office that shows his plan for dealing with Vinny. He wants to stuff him inside of a Captain Baseball bat suit and rig him with a bomb, which could prove to be a bit problematic since we're going to find him next. On our way over to Vinny's, we get ambushed by a group of his men and we crash the cleaner's van that we stole. At this point, we're still a couple blocks away from our destination. The section of the city we've ended up in is a full-blown gang war between the cleaning commandos and the Italian mob. The level itself is set around all of these crumbling apartment buildings, some of which still have ancient Valkyrie tags on the walls, a reminder of the struggles from our previous misadventures. The goons from both sides want Max's head, except for that one time that they don't for some reason, as Italians mistake us for the reinforcements that they called in. Max smartly just goes along with this, taking point with a squad of mobsters. I'm not sure how they don't recognize Max, as he's clearly beaten to shit, covered in bloody bandages, and acts like some regular Joe Schmo. Not to mention the fact that Max almost single-handedly eviscerated the Italian mob in the previous game. So you'd think that the Mafia immediately recognizes him as the boogeyman who almost single-handedly destroyed their operation, but no. I mean, eventually someone recognizes us. Then the whole crowd turns on you, which is a little funny. After we carve a path through the cranny tenement blocks, we finally get to Vinny's joint where... oh boy, we have to do an escort mission. Welcome to the worst section of the game. We find Vinny trapped inside of a Captain Baseball bat boy costume with a bomb strapped to him. If he dies, the bomb explodes, likely killing both of us. We need to keep Vinny alive since he says that he'll help us take Vlad down. So Max begrudgingly decides to help him stay alive. This means that we have to babysit the unhelpful prick as he's unable to use any weapons and doesn't have regenerating health. So if he gets hurt, you're paying for it for the rest of the run. I let him get hit once or twice and I had to deal with it for the rest of the chapter. All he does is run to cover and whine and complain as he begs us to keep him alive. At the very least, he stays put most of the time, which means he's usually out of the line of fire. Usually. You'll be happy when he stops moving too, because all you hear every single time he takes a step is that goddamn squeaking noise. My god, it's horrible! After the shootout in Vinny's used car lot, we have to make our way through a warehouse where it turns out Vinny's head is too big to fit through any doorway. So that's fun. After we clear out the warehouse, we end up taking an elevator up to Vinny's penthouse where we find is a huge fucking Captain Baseball bad boy dweeb.
What? What? I'm a collector. Do you know how much this stuff is worth? I tell you, fucking much.
Right, he's a collector. You have any of these figurines in jars anywhere, Vinny? After that, we have to get to his car by going through this chop shop, where we have to raise his car so that Vinny can get up. You know what? Just fuck this level. I'm gonna add up another 39 to the Payne count so I can move on from this horrible section. There we go, we'll round it off to a nice 200. After that, we end up heading over to the funhouse in an attempt to find Mona. Surprise, surprise, she isn't there, but Vlad is, which is unfortunate for us considering the fact that he has the detonator for the bomb in Vinny's suit, and he, detonates the bomb. Mona was actually close by, perched up on a rooftop with her sniper rifle watching the meeting take place. When she saw the bomb go off, she rushed in to save Max, because obviously he's still alive. He's in the box of the game for a reason. This next section is the final time we visit the funhouse. After all, it is kinda on fire, so it'd be kinda hard to visit a smoldering pile of ashes. For the most part, this level is like a better version of Punchinilla's restaurant from the previous game. Unlike in that game, I was actually able to beat this on my first time run, which is a nice change. After we get through the fire and flames, we end up switching back to Max's perspective, where we find out that Vlad shot us in the head since he's pissed that we killed his girlfriend. In the end, though, Vlad walks off and Mona is there to save us from the brink. Not before we go through one last nightmare sequence. This one is fine, just walking around some dingy apartment complex. I could talk about Max's crumbling psyche, but at this point I figured it's pretty apparent, considering the fact that every time something bad happens he has to have some kind of hellish fever dream. Once again, I encourage you to go out and seek an actual video about this game's story, rather than just letting me sit here and butcher it because I have the mental fortitude of a 5-year-old when it comes to understanding figurative writing. After we come to, Mona is there to help lift us out of the burning wreck. Max immediately wants to head over to Alfred's Manor, as that's where Vlad is heading next. Mona tries to discourage this idiotic approach, but Max is insistent. The last sequences of the game take place back at Alfred's Manor, and this is probably the game at its peak. It's way better than the cock and ball torture of the Acer Plaza, but then again, that's not a very high bar to pass. When the pair finally arrive, Max decides to head onto the ground floor while letting Mona take care of the second floor. The mansion itself is downright sprawling, encompassing many outdoor areas as well as 2 or 3 floors stocked full of enemies and weapons. I know Alfred is a member of a secret society and some kind of politician or something, I honestly can't remember, but this mansion is just kind of gaudy and over the top. Regardless, I like the aesthetic more than the soulless Acer Corporation tower. The gameplay itself is also fantastic. I know I've only been briefly touching on it throughout the game, but this is probably where the game is at its best. It's challenging, but not horribly unplayable. When we're finally done cleaning out the mansion, we meet back up with Mona, and it turns out she actually wanted to kill us, but she obviously doesn't do that. Regardless, it wouldn't have really mattered anyway, since Vlad is there to finally tie up the loose ends. Vlad gets ready to finish off Max, but Woden wheels his way in to prevent Vlad from doing so. The poor old bastard tries to attack Vlad only for him to be swiftly double-tapped in the chest. Max then decides that now is the time to strike at Vlad instead of taking the opportunity when Alfred attacked him, which probably would have made the fight a little less unfortunate. Vlad ends up flipping a switch to detonate a bunch of explosives around the building, causing the pair to fall into a deeper level of the mansion. Vlad loses his gun and pisses off. Luckily for us, the gun that Vlad was looking for was sitting under Max's fat ass the entire time. After that, we just go through, kill a couple of guys, and then Vlad starts the detonation time for a bunch of explosive barrels around the basement. To actually survive the blast, you have to climb into Alfred's panic room, then shut the door. For some reason, I need to look up a walkthrough to find that one out, because sometimes I'm just fucking slow. After that, we just have to clear out a couple more squads of goons before we can finally confront Vlad. He's perched up in this thing? Now, what you actually have to do is pretty obvious. You have to dislodge all these pegs in the chandelier to crush Vlad. The only problem is the fact that the hitboxes on the pegs are kinda bullshit. I shot at them from like a good 20 different angles, and they would just not budge. You have to shoot them from this very precise angle where you have to shoot them through the hole, which is something that does not go well in a game where most of your weapons are horribly inaccurate. Honestly, I thought I was going to run out of ammo during this fight, because it has a second phase where Vlad starts tossing pipe bombs which destroy your cover. Still though, no matter how bumbling I am, I take him out on my first try. At the very least though, Vlad does die in a very spectacular fashion. After taking out the trash, we're taken back to the beginning of the game, where we stumble our injured ass back to Mona, who is still miraculously alive after suffering from blood loss for like 30 fucking minutes while I was busy killing everybody. As she breathes her last breaths, the police storm into the building to find out that Max is the only survivor. In the end, Max has finally learned to move on from his past, accepting the loss of his wife and his daughter, as well as Mona. That night, Max has a dream about his wife.
I had a dream of my wife. She was dead. But it was all right.
What a fucking game this has been, man. I have to say, now that I've beaten it all the way through, this has shaped up to be my favorite game in the series. It's just such a vast improvement over the previous game to the point where it leaves me with virtually nothing to complain about. The only thing that comes to mind is the game's length, being only around 3 hours long. That's also counting cutscenes and the various failed attempts that I had along the way. But I honestly don't really mind in the end. This game is meant to be a very cinematic, one-time experience. But that's not a bad thing. It's just something that's meant to be experienced once every now and then, not over and over again in the pursuit of seeking out endless multiplayer hours. Honestly, I kinda want more short, one-stop cinematic games like this. A game that feels like a blockbuster and lasts about the same length as one, too. In the end, this would be Remedy's final contribution to the series, ending their partnership with Rockstar and moving on to pursue other projects. This, for a long time in fact, left the series in a sort of limbo, but that's not really a bad thing. While Max Payne 3 did eventually come along, Max's story here had a nice ending to it. He's grown from his vengeful self into a new person, learning to move on with his life. Regardless, Max Payne 3 and its rocky production are a whole nother can of worms for another time.